Hello, welcome to another edition of Low Code Campfire. This is episode number 135. So that's 135 weeks almost in a row of good plant and app content. Today we'll be talking about a variety of things, whatever you want to talk about, but we'll also be talking about the low code development playbook. So let's see, if I didn't mention it, this is the episode for February 23rd, 2024. I am Dale Warner, Head of Support for Plant and App. This is an event we do every week. It's an all skill levels welcome event that you can we get together. We talk about Plant an App and how to accomplish certain things, any areas where you're stuck. So bring something to show or be ready to help your fellow low coders. We record all these, put them out on YouTube, so everything that you say is going to live on forever on YouTube. And so all those are out there. You should subscribe and you'll know when we post. So that's youtube.com/plantandapp. We run this agenda week by week, and actually the agenda has changed ever so slightly. We will go say hello and then go around the campfire talking about a variety of things. So your first call and any topics you submit in advance. And then we look at other things like contributions to our common Campfire website, a website of techniques, the anything posted in the community or feature requests. And the new item is Low Code Development Playbook. We will be talking about that several times over the course of the next weeks coming up. Sometimes we get into dark corners and ghost stories. That's just trying to stretch our campfire metaphor as far as we possibly can. After an hour or so, we go into our afterglow segment where we turn off the recording, raise a virtual adult beverage, and enjoy each other's company just a little bit more off the record. So do engage with us. If you've got noise going on in the background, mute is a good idea. Otherwise, just be nice to your fellow low coders. You can submit those things in advance, either by using this QR code, and you can submit a question, or you can email me directly if you have my super secret email address. So with that, good morning all and hello.
Happy
Good morning,
Friday.
everyone.
Absolutely happy
Good
Friday.
morning.
So we'll start right out. Anyone with a first call item, something that's you've just been waiting to ask or to say about Plant an App? No one with any issues. If not, Jim, just before the meeting, sent a couple of things over, and I think we'll be able to answer at least one of your two questions, Jim. So,
okay.
And the other one might elude me, but we'll see. So, last chance for first call. Otherwise, I'm jumping into that. Let's see if I can find it here. The question Jim asked is something like this. This was an email from him, and he's saying, and I'm doing the easy one first, Jim. I can explain this one. I couldn't for a long time, but now I can. So in a grid based off an entity, I see these context options in the data source. Can't figure out what to enter or why they're there. So what's this all about? So these context items here. So I created a test to show that off, and actually I've got it right here. Let me drag it in. So let me set the stage a little bit. I have an entity called book. In my entity of book, I have chapters, and chapters is a list of type entity. So there's a list of chapters. And so how this presents in the interface is you have a book, whatever the book name is, and you can have chapters that go with the book. If you click down into it, you can see the chapters, and in this case, we've just the name of the chapters are simply 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I wanted to add another chapter to this book, it would be first of all, I have to give it some kind of a sequence, and that's just the fields that I have on this, and I'm going to call it 4, and I don't know what the XX field is. That was some other testing I did on some other day. So through the interface, you can add chapters to your book. Not terribly crazy. So this is where the context comes into play. If we were to go, and I've got an empty page here, we were to go and we wanted to do something where we wanted an action grid, a listing of chapters, we can add a grid to the page, and we could try. Ah, there it is. I don't know why I dropped out of edit mode here. There it is. So we drop it on the page. We say that we're going to configure it. And for the data source, we pick that we want to do chapters. So because chapters is part of this many-to-many relationship, this list of chapters relationship with book, it says, well, what book are you talking about? This is a little bit hard to read and understand if you just see it popping up. But the question it's really asking is, relative to the context of book, we're going to show chapters. What book are we talking about? And so to answer this question, I'm going to use the query string, and I'm going to get the book ID, and I'm going to provide a default one in case there isn't any. So it's going to go to book 1 if we don't say it otherwise, but we're going to be able to pick different books based on the query string. And aside from that, I don't think I have to answer anything. I'm going to be very simplistic here. And in my data fields, these are the fields that come from chapters that we'll get the sequence and the name of the chapter. Yeah, we'll also get the ID, who cares? So we'll add that. So this is going to give us our fields, and so we'll save and go back. So now because we've told it by default book 1, it's showing all the chapters from book 1. And if I add book ID equals 3, it tells us, it gets the chapters that are relative to that. And so there's only one chapter that's in that. And if we go back and look at, I'm going to go to our books entity just to kind of show you the data here a little bit. So book. So book 1 had 4 chapters, book 3 had 1 chapter, book 4 has no chapters. And so if we go here, and say that we want book 4, we should get no chapters. So that shows up, to answer your question then, Jim, this shows up only when the entity that you've selected as the data source has list of relationship, and it's asking you which of the things you're tell me what you mean. And yeah, Ben is suggesting a better label, absolutely.
Yeah, I was actually I was using it in reverse, so that's why it wasn't working for me because of that.
And I'd be interested here. I'm going to pick books, and so books is part of a relationship with is in a many-to-many with chapters, but probably because it's not specified in chapters, you don't get the reverse relationship. It understands which direction you're trying to go. Anyway, so you'll see several of those if your entity is part of multiple list of relationships. You'll see you might see multiple contexts, and it is not entirely clear what that means. So hopefully that clears that up.
It does. Thank you.
Absolutely. So hopefully you'll be able to use that now. There was a first part to your question, which is about doing an import. So support ticket, no answer. Maybe somebody figured this one out. Bad data flag found. So importing from an external data source, and what action?
It's the CSV import with a tab separated file.
Okay. And so it says that you can do bad data found, but I think that message, if I recall this problem correctly, the message comes from the library that we use
right
to do the CSV import. It's not our message. We're just passing along when an error message gets raised. And so I think there's not we don't implement a bad data found setting and pass it to the routine. And so that's kind of the nature of the problem. You're importing, the data's bad, and what do we do with it?
Right. Right now the workaround has user interaction, which is open that same file in Excel and save it back let Excel save it as a new tab separated file, and the data comes in. So I don't know what, like to figure out in the file why that actually blows up to take the user step out of involvement step out.
But and I suspect on the ticket you probably provided us some an example of a bad file.
Yeah, it was quite a while ago.
Okay. Well, there's it was quite a while ago. Part of the I have a new tool in my tool belt since then, which is AI. I wonder if there was whatever the data condition is. I wonder if something could read the file, like for example, JavaScript to read the file, detect what the condition is and correct it to come up with an output file. So maybe a step in between a pre-processing of the file to check
Right.
for valid CSV. Or and it wouldn't actually even have to be a reading and writing of files. Your importer, you probably end up with the CSV in a token someplace.
It loads it to it it loads it to a table, and then there's all kinds of SQL that runs against the columns of the table.
But the error that's happening is before the
load. Yeah, it doesn't put anything in. I have a table that's got 255 columns on it or something like that. They're just generic.
Yes.
And then
but yeah. So in the step when this happens, you get what? No records added to your temporary table?
No records at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the step right before you try and create the table, I suspect, I mean, you've got the CSV either in a file or in a token, and I suspect that we could try and process it with some JavaScript to see if it's valid and fix it. And if you either want to send me back to the ticket so that I have a
Okay.
copy of the file, or send me another. Open it up again as a ticket. I'll be happy to see if I can figure that one out.
Okay. I will do that.
Help with it.
I have a new file that arrived today that, you know, raised the issue again. So it's a
Of course. Um, good.
oh, Ben raised his hand. Maybe he's
Yes, because Ben does big data all the time. He knows how to fix this problem.
Well, I'm not going to immediately say I can fix the problem since I don't really know directly what the problem is. But my question is, have you tried using a data difference utility against your original file and then your cleaned file that does import?
I have not, but that's a good idea.
Yeah, because that's pretty much step one on figuring out what the problem is. So if you, like you just said, you have a file that it just happened again, take that file, use you could use diffchecker.com, just paste the text in, box one is your original, then clean the file that you know is going to import, paste that text into the second box, run the diff checker, and it'll tell you what differences it found between the two. And then that will help narrow down what the problem is with your original file, because it should show you that there's some sort of a difference. And then at
Okay.
that point, you can decide, how do you want to proceed? Do you want to clean up the file on import? Do you want to handle the error on import? Whatever it is you want to do, but at least it'll narrow it down and let you know what the problem is.
Okay.
All
Well,
right, so I learned something new today. Diff checker. There's 17 different ways to do everything. I did not know diffchecker.com.
and that's why I said throw it to the campfire, because it's just like, okay, what's somebody around here will have an idea, and I wasn't even thinking that way. And I have a desktop tool that lets me compare files that I
Mm-hmm.
will run out right now while we're sitting off on the call while other people are having their issues solved.
Be interested. I would be interested. My guess is I've often run into issues with like quotes or apostrophes, something that ends up needing to be quoted that might automatically get fixed by Excel. But let's
Yeah.
see. Be interesting. All right, so we did a couple of first calls. Anyone else with a first call? Right, I have stuff. Let's go on. Make sure where we are here. First call. Okay, so this is kind of a mention, but it gets me into my low code playbook stuff too. So it'll be a good one, I think. I didn't realize or know explicitly, but if you ever use parse JSON into tokens, I didn't realize that it, or wasn't ever certain, but it doesn't initialize any tokens when you do work. So let's see what I'm talking about. I've illustrated this by way of a workflow, and so we'll talk about that a little bit. But the idea first is I want to create an output. I want to parse a list. And just to illustrate this problem. So to start with, I'm doing a create a list from SQL. So I'm getting a couple of users and putting them into user list. In my next step, I'm converting user list to JSON. So using the list to JSON type. And so we end up with user JSON. Because again, the thing I'm trying to exercise is this parse JSON into tokens. So parse JSON into tokens creates tokens out of whatever's in JSON, so you can just use it innately without having to navigate the JSON. And so I'm passing it user JSON. The base token name is X. So that means that everything that gets created will have X as the prefix. And then I'm doing a split, and this is the area that we'll talk about more later. But so an exclusive gateway, and I have a condition here, whether or not we do a second parse or not do a second parse. Second parse is a text variable that is coming in false. So it's going to default to going down this path, doing nothing more in this step. If I say true, it'll go into the second step, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then I have this, I was just removing the value from user JSON just so that it isn't part of the output that I'm going to get. I have this custom action that I've posted on our Campfire website and will eventually be part of our product, but this unsupported action that turns everything that's in your context and stuffs it into whatever token we say, which in this case is result. The result token is tokens. And so in my output, I have tokens. I'm just outputting it. All right, so that's the setup for all this. When we run it, and I'm going to choose the false path. So the default or false path. And so I get all this JSON. Let's take a look at it. This is what tokens equal when we're done. So our input variable started out as false. We have the user list that I did, it returned 2 records. The user JSON got initialized. That's the one I didn't want to see, so I was getting rid of it. And then everything that begins with X is the stuff that came from that parse tokens. So X0 is the entire, X:0 is the entire record. It's got the name and the user ID. That's what we asked for. But then 0.name is the name split out, 0.user ID is the user ID split out, and then we see that repeating. All right. Ben asked a question about conversion, and there is a, what is this? Plugins, JSON viewer, format JSON. So I did Control Alt, I selected everything, did Control Alt Shift M, and it flipped it to a nicely formatted. Yeah, so that's the tool. So so far all we've done is proven that parse token, the parse JSON into tokens creates a bunch of tokens. And so now let's look at the other path. When I do true in this second parse, there is I'm doing a parse JSON into tokens. It's a static parse where I'm parsing just this little array, name, and then it's got X, Y, Z, Z, Y, extra points if anyone can tell me why I use that variable. But, and it's going into the same X as a base token. So when we run this, and this time we'll say true. Ben says that he uses JSON code beautify for that usually, and I used to do that too. I still do, as a matter of fact. It's a nice, easy tool, but the problem is they've gotten pretty heavy with their ads, and I just am tired of clicking to get rid of ads. They got to pay the bills somehow. Anyway, so I'm doing this alternate path true, and so we'll get that again, and go back into Notepad, paste it in, select everything, Control Alt Shift M. I lost my focus, and we get it formatted. So what we see now is that name has this other variable, 0 name, and the 0 record. So the 0 record got parsed, but the thing that I was interested in and wanting to illustrate here is that this namespace X didn't get cleared in advance. We never said we would, but the reality, if you're doing multiple parse JSONs into tokens, and you do the first one, it's going to create a whole bunch of tokens. You do the second one, it's going to create a whole bunch of tokens. If it happens to be the same data source, if you're doing it with more records, everything's going to get overwritten or might get overwritten. If you do it with less records, which is what we did here in this case, it's going to leave the extra records out there as tokens. And if the names of the tokens had changed, you'll have the old stuff and the new stuff. And so from a support perspective, anybody using this is just, hey, make sure that you understand what this is doing, and it may be leaving stuff behind that you didn't count on. So just be careful in how you use it. That's Ben guessed about the video game cheat code. It is in fact a video game cheat code. Well, no, actually it's not a video game cheat code, but it is a cheat code, so close, keep going. All right. So does anybody else use parse JSON into tokens? And am I the only one that was so surprised in what this was doing? Anybody, any thoughts?
Yeah, this is Mark. I'm using the parse JSON into tokens, and I had not experienced what you showed us today, but I hadn't been in that same situation where I was reusing the same thing over and over.
Right. Yep. If you're in a loop, if you're not in a loop, if you're just using it one time, it's no problem. It just does exactly what you're expecting. But if you were doing it either twice or like this is explicitly, or in a loop, and part of the revelation for me is prior to creation of without having a tool like this to see what's in tokens, it's a little bit of a mystery what's out there, and just as long as it works, we don't care, right? But so using the tools that are out there right now to mitigate that, you might want to, if you're doing a loop and you need to use parse tokens, you might want to split that off into a separate workflow, because each workflow gets its own context. And so every time you called it, you would be guaranteed to start clean. It's an interesting question whether it would be worth having an action to clear context based on a prefix, being able to get rid of all the X colon whatevers, but that's for another day. Code.
Or similar to the lists where you can check off an option that says clear list before load.
Right. And that's from a user input state. Let's see, is that? Yeah, clear before loading. So clearing the new empty list. The thing, and so that would be a nice user interface to have clear before loading for their base token thing. That would be a nice user interface. I believe internally the list is actually a single variable, or maybe two, but because we also produce the count so there's a token called user list and a token called user list count, and that's it. When you use parse JSON and tokens, it creates a bunch of tokens, and so it would, not that it would be hard. I think you could iterate through them, but from an interface standpoint, it's easier to put the checkbox than it is to actually do the cleanup. Okay.
Bill, what was the end of your workflow, the show get context tokens? I know you talked about that before, but can you do a quick summary on what that is and where that comes from?
Sure. So this was done as a Campfire contribution. And so anybody that has access to Campfire can load this on your site. It's a quick, it's a separate module install that hooks into Plant an App. So it's a let's see, get context JSON is here, and it's non-plaintiff action. It's a Dale Warner produced action that reveals the context of the token anywhere an action can be used, and so you can download it. Here's what you do. You install it, and now you've got a new action in the context menu called Get Context Tokens JSON. So this is where you get it, and I guess I can drop that on chat. It installs very quickly, and then once you've done that, what it looks like internally is it pops up and it has this dialog that has our standard. You can have a condition, but it's got three things: the result token, the maximum length, and the omit. And so that this says everything that is going to be stored in pairs in an array, name and value, into the tokens array. So you're going to get an output JSON. This is going to be a max length. If you some things are incredibly long, and if you want to just protect yourself against super long outputs, concatenating everything, you could provide a value, and then you can provide a list of things that you don't want, and this is probably the better way to omit that variable that I cleared. So if I say that I want to omit anything that begins with user or play, which play doesn't exist in my case, but I wouldn't have to do this action here. I was clearing user JSON, and it was still appearing in the output as a blank thing. So instead of doing this, let's just get rid of that. And now this thing is just omitting user from the output. And so when we save and test, now it's going to omit everything from, so I've got some other thing like user list. That's both of these things are going to get omitted from the output. So we'll say true. Doesn't matter which path we use here. But so now we take a look at the JSON. And we don't have any user things in the output, but everything else that's present in the context gets revealed as this array of names and values. So does that answer your question about what this is?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's showing you or showing us all of the tokens that we have access to at that point. Is that right?
That's
ones that are in
there's a
context.
little bit of limitation. There's a little bit of limitation in there. It's showing, for example, the get or query string tokens is you could get more, but it's showing the stuff that you put into the.
Okay.
And actually, I think this is the older version. Okay, now this is exciting. Let's install the newer version. So we'll go through the install here. Connected forms. Nope, JSON. So we'll go back to this and install it. I think I put a new version in here that gives you a little bit more stuff. So let's do it. I'm omitting some things. So we'll download it and then go back to the site and go to extensions, install. Sure, install. Probably don't have the versioning correct. Let's see. Yeah, and installed successfully. So now let's see what happens. We will refresh this. Ah, um, yeah, so this changed just a little bit to omit nothing, say none. This is mine, right? This is not a really fancy implementation, and I doubt that this is the way that it's going to be done when we add it to the product. But anyway, this is a little bit confusing. But none, we're going to see a couple of extra things. So we'll run it and let's see what more we get out of this. Go. So here's what you get that's different. There's some things like current action ID and current module ID, these that begin with underscore that you don't even realize are there. And I was just being in my first version, I was just arbitrarily suppressing the underscore ones. And by saying none, you can get the even the underscore ones. So if it might be of value to you, Mark, because I know you're often interested in either the module ID, which I think informed you'd get current module ID as an output. So knowing what's in there, but even still, that's a long answer to it. Are you getting everything? No, you're getting most things, the things that you put into it, into context.
Okay. The things that you put into it, that's still valuable. It's actually more than what we put into it. It's like there are some default values like the module ID that I didn't make up.
Yep.
But that's
So,
really cool to have access to all those, to know they're there.
just to kind of stretch your mind a little bit, in the newer versions, the create update tokens, there is this checkbox now, tokenized token names. So now that you know and can iterate through what is present in context by using that other action, you can do things like creating a token called and if you're in the middle of a loop, X is a bad example in this case. If you're in the middle of a loop that's setting the value of Y to 0 and then 1 and then 2, you can create tokens based on um, the value of Y or any other tokens, date time now or whatever. And so you can now, previously you had to specify a name and it would not be tokenized. Now it's token. You can choose to tokenize the name. So those
Well,
two put together.
that's quite a reveal. That so now tokens made on the fly will work, right?
Yes. Yep. You can make tokens on the fly.
Okay, so that was a feature request from a while ago. So that's really cool. I'm looking forward to that now. So when did that appear?
Well, it's present here. I'm on the one of the later versions of 125, so I suspect if you install all the hotfixes for 125, you'll get it.
Okay, well, I just did that yesterday, so
And then,
go look for it.
yep, and then this other one you got to obviously install itself. Okay, so I'm going to go on, but we're really not going far. So this was just a support item that I wanted to talk about. And again, the main topic was parse JSON into tokens, creates a whole lot of stuff. Ben asks a great question. So now it's hard for me to move on. He asks, create token with a value with the name of X. So let's try that. And so we'll do it here. Context, create token X with no value. And I think it's not you said as blank, but I'm going to give it a value. And then Let's clean this back up again to omit user things. I think what we're going to get is that it does not eliminate the X token, but rather just adds a new token, a base token, and a token only named X. And yeah, we can see it right here. So it added an X token, but it didn't clear out anything. It doesn't implicitly, it doesn't clear stuff out, and that's kind of what I would have expected. Okay, so let's talk about the low-code development playbook. I mentioned this very briefly at the end of last session that we are internally for our delivery team coming up with a list of standards. This is how we do low code so that everyone is working from the same thing, because low code, just like any other language, can be done well or poorly. And when you have to have somebody, when you're following behind somebody else in a project, it's better if it's done well than if it's done poorly. So we're kind of setting some standards internally, and we thought we would share them with you, and then and also talk about them, so that if you find those standards valuable, you can adopt them, and then the ones that we're considering for use internally, if you getting your feedback on them, getting your perspective on them is valuable to us to understand whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. So the first one, and I hit this very quickly last week, so we'll just dive in again. The first one is whether or not you use domain names in your app. This one stemmed from something that I had somebody create a clone of one of our apps for us. For me, I was going to use it. Actually, I needed it for a client implementation. And so we have this great app. We cloned it. My job was to get rid of the stuff that they weren't supposed to have access to. And when I went in and started deleting things, it referred me, there was a link back to it was hard-coded URL to our actual app, not the clone. So I did delete a bunch of stuff out of our clone, out of our production site. And so then this was the standard that results, right? So in the fine tradition of closing the door after the horses escape. So the policy for our people, our delivery team, is never use absolute URLs for pointing inside the same application. And it says why we do that, and which is just what I just explained. How to avoid it is that you're using a feature like the redirect to a URL or an API autocomplete, or if you're calling an API through a server request. So you're in an app, you're calling your same app with an API server request. If you use the absolute URL and you then have cloned it, now it's going to be pointing potentially to the wrong, or likely to the wrong spot. So the solution is don't use, remove the root part and use domain root token instead. So you would change this to domain root, or you can also, like in a redirect, you can use slash and then just omit the domain name and it will work. So that's the play. I say that's the play. Internally, there's a pattern of thought that says, create plays that this is just kind of a how-to manual to do things. They're not necessarily tremendously detailed. It's just let's have a pattern for doing things, and we call them plays. So we have a playbook for low-code development. Anyway, so does this thing make sense to you as a policy? And do you already do this, or would you argue with it?
Yeah, that's a good policy, and yes, I am already doing
Says he's ahead of us by years.
it. Ben probably is. Yeah.
Yeah, because no, I only say that because I used to do, and I still do, a lot of the cloning of my live sites to a test site. If I'm going to be adding something new or doing a major test upgrade, whatever. And when I do that, if I don't obviously have something that's dynamic like the URL domain root, then those buttons that are connected to whatever are pointing to the live website. So that had bitten me many, many, many years ago. And that's when I realized that's not a good way of doing things. So I've always gotten used to now using URL domain root. So it's also nice too when I do a test that is, let's say, for example, um, if I'm running off of my live website, our SSL is load balanced. So when you're coming from the outside, you're HTTPS. However, if I then RDP to the server, and run the website, it's HTTP, not S. So again, URL domain root is going to cover both because it's going to take it within the context of how the site is loaded with
Yep.
or without the S. So that's why I've been doing that for a while because like I said, it bit me in the past. So live and learn.
Absolutely. So I don't see any votes against, and this actually is a rule that is in an approved state. We have a process of saying that more than one person, anyone can draft a play, and then when it's ready for approval, you get multiple people to say, "Yep, this is our policy." And so now this is until somebody suggests a better policy. This is an approved policy for us. So that's the first one. So then we've got one in draft, and we'll go take a look at that one. But it says, do not use conditions on actions in workflows. So the policy looks something like this. It says when you put conditions inside the actions, that means if somebody wants to understand what the logic is, you got to click on everything to see if there's a condition, and then you got to understand what that condition, how that condition impacts the result. And so what should be easy is difficult. And so now you've got a discovery process that eats up time. This is all about then either a developer coming back to their own work a year later and saying, what was I on that day? Or you've got somebody else trying to come behind you and do work on something that you've done and they can't understand what you've done. So this is Bogdan's policy. He did a video that was connected to it, a 5-minute why and how video, but it says how to do it using the exclusive gateway. And so this is how I'm circling back to what I was showing you earlier. I did a couple of things, but specifically this is the exclusive gateway part. So visually, you can see that as you're coming along, you're looking at the value of do second parse. So you do have to do a little thinking. Where does this come from? Or not do second parse. This can be any level of complex conditional, um, but it's going to in this case it's going to be one of two things because it's true or false, and then we do a split, and you can clearly see the logic is um, if you the additional logic, you follow this path, what happens, and then the other. So if you go into each of these, you'll find that there aren't any conditions as part of it, and so the idea is then it's just clearer to look at, clearer to understand what's going on. The other thing that Bogdan, and this wasn't part of this policy, but that he did in his video was, and I don't know if you're doing this at all, but there is this call out that you can use that's just about documentation. It doesn't do anything. But you can put as much as or as little as you like and tag it, and that is from being able to understand what's going on in that action, or especially if it's an execute actions loop, it helps very much understand what the thinking behind something was. So adding the callouts is another clarity item, but this play is about doing splits. So anyone with opinions about whether or not you should use conditions in workflows on actions?
I'll let the hands go first.
Matt, you're on the top of my list.
All right. Well, strictly speaking, my hand was for the previous topic, but
you got to remember, if you don't put it down, and somebody notices, we're going to call on you. So.
So yeah, this certainly makes sense, and I think the challenge here, for me at least, is really using this interface effectively, because it can be, you get spread out quite quickly. And so the downside of this, while I totally understand the logic behind it, the downside is when you're putting all these items into your workflow like this, it can become a little bit unwieldy. Just my opinion.
Thank you. I think there's validity to that. But I'm going to hear you guys out first. Ben, you were next. Are you talking about this topic?
Yes. I have a differing opinion. I don't think making this a policy of not using conditionals and using these gateways being the appropriate way. I think each one has their place, and to make it a policy to say avoid or do not under any circumstances use conditional statements, the conditional piece in actions within a workflow, I don't agree with. There are some cases where it's not even possible. For example, if you have a bunch of actions in an execute actions list, you can't do anything other than conditionals. So that's number one. That just basically breaks this policy completely. And in some cases, it's more complicated to do it as a split like this. Whereas if it's just a situation where you have an action that says, okay, well, if something is true, you're going to run it, but if not, just skip right over it. I don't necessarily want to have this whole entire split thing where I have to test a thing and then go with a blank or whatever. I just want to not do it, just skip through it. It's a little quicker to program. Granted, visually here, it's not easy to see that there is a condition. So, and again, I don't know how much control you guys have over the use of this product that does the visualization, but if there was a way to make it a visualization of those little boxes to show that there is a condition, similar to like when you have an action, you have that orange bar that says conditional statement, whatever. So you could see without opening it that you have a condition in there. I would think that that would be more beneficial than to turn around and say the policy is don't use conditions and always use a gateway. But that's just me.
Good. And Jim, you had your hand up.
So my policy is I use the conditional because I find using the gateways with their very small box for writing conditions to be very painful. But I add the comment like you've done there, explaining the condition out at the high level. But I would not want to, for the reasons Matt mentioned of spreading this out and everything, and I wouldn't want to do it in this method. Just be an extra work. So.
And Matt, is your hand up or just still up?
It is up yet again. So my thought, it kind of ties into where Ben was going to. One of the things that would be great is to have a capability to just add your own internal documentation to an action stack or something like that. Let's say in this case, yeah, one of these groupings here, just to put your notes in there. So back to Bogdan's point, somebody could look at that, assuming they did the work and documented, they could simply look at what the logic is and why they're doing something. Now you're going to show me that it already exists. Get out. Is that new?
Recent-ish. It doesn't execute. It's an action that you can put anywhere that doesn't execute, and you can. It's got a nice
Yeah.
Trumbo-wig style, so you can put nice things in here and make it look nice. But yep,
Well, I'm glad I raised that. Thank you.
absolutely. And ooh, Mark, you came off mute. Were you jumping in?
How does that note present, Dale? What does it look like?
Nothing. It presents just like what you. It doesn't do anything. Doesn't present it anywhere other than whatever you type.
You have to double click on it to open it up.
Yes, you got to open it up, but you could drop your note in here, or you could put a hyperlink to a documentation to a Google Doc or wherever you did your original stuff. But just anywhere along the way that you want to, you can say anything. And it marginally, I mean, it is another action. It is something that's going to take up a fraction of compute time to ignore, or you know, if you went crazy with it, it's got to load the whole action stack in order to process it. But we're pretty efficient with it, so it's with a very small cost, you can put notes in. But and then of course you can change the title of the thing as well. So just for the developer, it doesn't present anywhere. I think at some point we will talk about being able to extract the notes and do something with them, but that's down the line.
Well, I like it. Yeah, I like the notes. I feel like you're dropping Easter eggs on us today. You've probably been using it for a while, but I don't think I knew about that one.
So Matt, now I have to ask, is it up or is it still up?
It is a new up. So, and this is a question about the last discussion, the URL discussion, and kind of back, and this is really more to Ben, I think. Ben, you had mentioned a while ago that you never use, if I recall correctly, never use redirect to portal page. You always use redirect to URL.
That is correct.
And the reason for that is?
Basically, in my respect, most of the time, I am redirecting to a tab ID. The reason I do that is, again, just out of my own experience. The people that are my clients tend to want to move things quite often. They don't like something where it's in the menu and they want to move it or reorganize, the reports in a different manner. I usually always call those pages using tab ID because if you start moving things around, it doesn't matter. Tab ID is always going to be the same, and it will pull out whatever the full URL is for that tab ID. If you hard code the path directly or you use the other dropdown, there's a chance that you start moving things around and things will start breaking and not function anymore. So just for the sake of being overly cautious and making things as dynamic as possible, I usually just do the URL : full URL, and then I open up the paren and I say tab ID equals whatever tab ID I want, And then that just pulls me out the full URL of that page, regardless of where its current location is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you
Hope
very
that
much.
answered your question.
Yes, it did. And I just want to confirm, Dale, my hand is indeed down.
Thank you. So, I just wanted to let you know that I agree with you, with all of your comments, and then particularly about execute actions as an issue, the level of effort versus the benefit can be a concern, because putting in these splits. Currently, our splits doesn't have an else path, which I find limiting. If condition is A, then do this, condition is B is do that, else do that, would be useful. So the fact that that doesn't exist makes me concerned that maybe it would be harder to account for every condition that might happen. But I also agree, for example, taking the time to put in good titles, is that what we call them? Yeah, to put in good titles, I think, is important, and using these call outs is important. And so if you're doing that and working towards documenting what you're doing, then I think you may be achieving the goal without having the hard and fast rule. And Patrick is asking about portal page, redirect to portal page being tab ID based. I believe that is the case. So you might there might be a case to make that redirect to portal page is as good as the method that Ben was talking about, but that's something I think for another day. All right. We're already 4 minutes over, but I want to make sure this is part of the record. It wasn't a video game, it was a game, 1976 game. It's crazy. And this code was a cheat code down in the documentation. Anyway, so with that, I would say that was another successful hour. And so we will in fact be uploading it to YouTube and keeping it forever. And so with that, I'll thank you all for joining. I'll just remind you, we will have Low Code Cafe this Wednesday, where I'll continue part 2 of the last one, and we'll get together again here at Low Code Campfire on Friday. So great session. Thanks for attending. And if you have a few minutes and like any of us, you can hang around for Afterglow. See you next week.